Yomawari Night Alone is a title released for the PlayStation Vita and Steam, and it's one I'm still not quite sure what to make of. By the way, I find the title of the game itself to be a tad redundant. Yomawari, translated from Japanese to English, means night watch. But for some reason, in the English release, they added the subtitle Night Alone. So fully translated, the English release is called Night Watch, Night Alone. The weird naming conventions don't stop there. Our protagonist is named Ononoko, or in English, girl, and then we have Oni-chan, which means sister, and finally we have Poro, her dog. But oddly, his name translates to the specific sound that teardrops make in Japanese. I wonder why that is. Why did they name the dog Teardrop? I shouldn't be one to judge. I have an old cat that I named Old Cat. Used to be just called Cat at one point, but that's another story. Yomawari isn't your standard release from Nipponichi Software. It breaks away from the standard of super JRPGs to bring players a horrifically challenging game filled with gore and cheap deaths, starring a cute young protagonist. Trust me when I say that they've never done that before. I'm kidding, of course, but I found it strange that when Yomawari was announced, it instantly started being compared to the likes of the Firefly Diary and A Rose in the Twilight. But outside of the live, die, and repeat until finally progress nature of the three titles, I think the comparisons fall apart even with the smallest degree of scrutiny thrown at them. Speaking of the Firefly Diary, certain copies of the Vita version of Yomawari were bundled with it, so don't take my word for it, compare the two for yourself. Shouldn't take you too long. Yomawari isn't necessarily as brutal of an experience like the aforementioned titles, and if I had to pick a genre of what it falls into, it's a survival horror title? Only unlike a survival horror title, you won't find yourself managing much, if any, resources, engaging in any sort of combat, or being scared for that matter. It can't be that scary if it's rated T for teen, for elements such as blood, violence, saying, violence. The double violence is promising, but the saying has me skeptical. Night Watch is a top-down isometric exploration title where stealth, item gathering, and basic puzzle solving are the core features of the gameplay. I hate to admit this, but Yomawari is a fairly shallow experience wrapped inside beautiful paper. Give me a chance to explain myself. The core issue I have with the game is the tone. I can't decide if this game wants me to think of it as shocking, horrific, or the cutest fucking thing I've ever seen. Let's start at the beginning. You're a little girl taking her dog Poro out on a walk at dusk, and they continue walking on the highway until she picks up a rock and decides to play fetch with Poro on the highway when... Okay guys, let's take a moment here to place a spoiler break, shall we? Is this an appropriate time for one? You've probably worked out what's going to happen next in your head based on the implication of the story so far, right? Anything could happen at this moment. My revealing of what takes place in the first 5 minutes of the game might ruin your remaining 2 hours and 55 minutes. I mean, there's always the possibility it could be like, surprise! They go out and eat ice cream and nothing terrible happens to that dog thereafter. It would be a terrible move of me to explain the setup and entire reason for the events to take place in the game by telling you that the dog gets hit by a truck moments after starting it. So I won't be doing that during this break. Skip to the time code to avoid that information. I can't say that I was blindsided by this moment, but I can say that Poro was. Look, I'm just not given enough time with these characters to grow attached to them. Maybe Poro was a sweet and loyal dog, or maybe he was a rapist dog. I don't know. I just met the guy, and even though I recognize this was just an easy way to shock the player into caring, with no personal attachment to either character so far, it was still totally effective, and I kinda care about the dog and the girl now, but mostly I care about the dog. So the girl goes home to seek the help from her sister in helping her find Poro. Come on, what does she hope to find? Dog pizza? You know how this is gonna end. It was like a 3-ton truck and there's bloody skid marks and there's a giant cliffside there, so even if the dog survived the hit, he fell off a fucking cliff. I even imagine the sound was like bark. Anyways, her sister never makes it back, so our protagonist takes her trusty flashlight and ventures into the nondescript town of spooky things happening all the time to find them both. Can I just say that I love the hand-painted art style of Yomawari, and I think it was a really smart move to draw all the characters in vector graphics. This goes a long way to securing a timeless quality about Yomawari. I think the cleanly drawn features of the world are also a bit of a setback for the horror atmosphere it was going for, since you can clearly make out all of the details of the monsters in front of you, leaving very little to the imagination. I also think that with the high-angle camera, it removes any anticipation of death because the player is too far removed from the girl, and it just creates an impersonal detachment throughout the entire game. Maybe it's just me complaining about nothing, but when I can see everything clearly from an Eye of God vantage point, it removes the surprise of what lies just beyond. It's still a marvelous game to look at, but the scares just weren't hitting the target with me, and I kind of feel alone in my sentiment as many reviewers were kowtowing about how terrified they were all the way through. I guess every baby's gotta start somewhere. The bulk of the horror is overly reliant on the player setting up the atmosphere on their end as a prerequisite before diving into the game. It's one of those games that's best played in the dark with a nice set of noise-canceling headphones to help you hone in on the spooks. Even in the right environment, there's not many new surprises here for survival horror veterans to throw their VITA in terror over. Although the game lets you loose in the town to explore, it's structured in a very linear fashion up until the post-game. You just go from one part of the town, avoiding one hit in your dead enemies, to the next in hopes of finding your sister and the now roadkill doggo that you call your pet. It's handled okay, nothing too interesting to speak of gameplay-wise, but I found myself looking forward to seeing what grotesque or often hilarious creatures the developers cooked up. That's primarily the only draw to Yomawari. It's like taking a stroll through an art gallery of nightmares, but unlike Nikki, which fully commits to its strongest asset, Yomawari had to implement a rudimentary bait and run stealth element to pad things out, but considering that the main story is about 3 hours long, it doesn't do much to prolong the experience or make it enjoyable. I don't mind short games, not at all. If I'm having a blast throughout, who cares? But the entirety of this game doesn't deviate enough from the formula to keep things interesting. Oftentimes, your objective is just to find a way to sneak past an enemy, with the goal of getting a key or an item to then take you to a new area where you will do the same thing again. Now, you have a few methods to accomplish this task. You can try tiptoeing past the monsters, which will work if the monster is blind. You can distract them by throwing an object, and depending on the enemy type and the sort of object you throw, it may or may not work. And if the stealth or distraction approach fails, you can run for your life and hope the enemy doesn't catch up to you before your stamina runs out, which happens very quickly. Or finally, you can find an object to hide behind until the enemy represented by this pink smoke here disappears. The checkpoints are these Jizo statues? that require an offering of 1 coin to soft save your game. You also use them as waypoints to teleport to the different sections of town. For the most part, they dole out the checkpoints far enough out there from one another to be challenging, but it still doesn't make up for some of the long stretches where it sends you back to the beginning of an area, which can be a problem when one of the bosses can teleport directly in front of you, causing a cheap death during a really slow, stealthy segment of the game. So when you die, you can look forward to the slow trek back up the cliff, and you're praying that the RNG gods might smile upon you this time, and all you're getting is frowns. I was really disappointed to see a world with such a unique set of horrific creatures lack an accompanying bestiary. I just want to know more about all these monsters and spirits that I'm encountering, and the game does very little to explain what the hell is happening in this town. These are just spirits, accept them. But perhaps that's the point here. Keep it all mysterious. If we explain nothing, then we don't have to try as hard. Jump scares equal money, and that's good enough for most people. I do like that the girl documents all the items she collects throughout her journey in her diary. Everything is drawn with crayons, including the map, and the map develops bit by bit as you progress. It's really neat. Once again, I like Yomawari, but I found the core experience to be just too shallow or to be a survival horror classic in my mind. Here are the things I love about it. I love the feeling of exploration, just never knowing what bizarre enemies will lie in wait for me in the next area. I love the initial mystery of the story, trying to figure out what the hell was happening, up until the anticlimactic showdown, which does nothing to give reason for the whole series of events that had taken place, other than angry spirits and the catalyst of a dead doggo. And I love the minimalistic sound design that paid into the loneliness aspect by choosing to forego a typical score and instead emphasize the sounds of monsters and nature. It's also cute. So cute. Even with all these positive elements in place, it doesn't do much to differentiate itself by having a lackluster cat-mouse stealth engine and a whole bunch of canned jump scares, none of which are impactful or distinct from one another to remember them as time goes on. All the horror aspects didn't leave a mark on me, and for that I was a little disappointed. It's been a year since I've beaten this game, and I found myself wanting to give it one more shot before I made my final assessment on the overall experience. I had a lingering feeling of unfinished business due to beating the game so quickly and not obtaining all the post-game collectibles. I was under the assumption that perhaps there was a post-game resolution to be found after getting all the hidden items that might shed light onto what the theme of the game was, and maybe there was a true ending tucked away in there that would leave a lasting impression on me, enough for me to recommend the game to you. So I checked my list of items and I started exploring every nook and cranny to find all the shinies, and I failed. The reason? There are several random events that have about a 1 in 20 chance of happening throughout the town, wherein an enemy might appear and you either gotta throw something at them or run past them to collect a rare item. Now, unless you're really lucky, there's no indication of these enemies and events existing at all. I recognize these little moments are just as shallow as the main game, but I kinda like them, and I'm a sucker for attention to detail. Almost every item you collect in the world will then appear in the girl's room, which feels like a series of small little payoffs for the overall effort. And I mean really small payoffs, because she can only interact with a couple of them. Now, after getting all the items, I come to find out there is no true ending or additional story. Okay, I can deal with that, but including the story mode, it only took me about 5 hours to 100% the game, and I'm fully aware that I got duped into thinking that there was more to this shallow experience than there actually was. But at that point I'm thinking, well, I've already 100%ed the game. What do I have left to do to get the platinum trophy? So at least I can say I got my money's worth. Let's see. Check. Long night. Play a total of 50 hours. What? There is not enough content in Yomawari to justify this trophy. 50 hours is way too sadistic for the developers to throw in there. Is this some bizarre way of fluffing up the hours of playtime? You know what? Whatever, I'll play your game. I'm getting the rubber band, I'm gonna tie it around my PS4 controller, and I'm disabling standby mode. Platinum City, here we come. And before you ask, yes, I'm aware there's a sequel coming out. And yeah, I got the collector's edition, even though it looks like it's garbage. See y'all next time. Maybe like a year from now with that sequel. We'll see.